The last round of negotiations on an agreement to keep the global temperature low has been concluded in October before the Paris meeting this November, when governments of more than 190 nations will gather in Paris to discuss a possible new global agreement on climate change. Will there be a deal? Will this meeting be successful? Who benefits from all these meetings? All these are some of the questions we will be talking about today on the program. Thank you for joining us on Earthfile. I'm Ayola Kasim. Time is running out. Conservative estimates produced by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change states that business as usual emissions will lock in a rise of at least 4 degrees Celsius globally by 2100, which will have extreme environmental, economic, political and social ramifications worldwide. To keep below 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels will require very ambitious reductions in emissions within the next 30 years. Nevertheless, there is considerable optimism for the Paris conference. Detailed negotiations have been taking place since 2011, and a draft text for Paris was circulated in Lima last year and finalized for discussion earlier this year. Conditions are now more favorable than ever for an agreement on an emissions reduction timetable. While the Paris Agreement cannot be a fix-all, experts believe it is the best tool there is at present with which to alter the global emissions trend post-2020.
It might sound a bit preposterous, but this is what is at stake. If we allow temperatures to rise too much, consequences will be devastating. And actually, we can already see some of the effects right now in this country, in Nigeria. Coastal erosion, for instance, is already taking place. Desertification is already taking place. Loss of revenue for farmers, loss of revenue when the cattle dies, loss of revenue when agriculture disappears, and so on and so forth. That leads to migrations, that leads to conflicts. This is happening in Nigeria, this is happening almost in all African countries, and even in Europe we can see the consequences. This is why we have to act in a decisive manner, in a forceful manner right now, and prepare the way for the future.
Current commitments on greenhouse gas emissions run out in 2020, so at Paris, governments are expected to produce an agreement on what happens for the decade after that at least, and potentially beyond. Given the growing seriousness of the climate change issue, the United Nations Climate Convention is expected to be unlike any before it under the 1992 Convention. Encouragingly, at an earlier conference in 2011, it was agreed by all countries that an outcome with legal force and applicable to all parties would be adopted at the conference in December 2015. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is the only international framework for addressing climate change where all countries have a voice, and the Paris Conference of Parties is a unique opportunity to unite the current patchwork of binding and non-binding arrangements into a single, comprehensive and effective regime for combating climate change.
The result we're expecting is to reach a new agreement which will replace what we call the Kyoto Protocol. The objective is to make sure that temperatures do not rise by more than 2 degrees by the end of the century. And in order to achieve that, we all have to limit and to cut our emissions of greenhouse gases. So the objective of the agreement is to make sure that this will happen, and this is what we call mitigation, and at the same time that all countries in the world and the world community take measures to help populations cope with the consequences of climate change, which are here already, and this is what we call adaptation. This is the agreement we hope to reach, we are sure we will reach in Paris.
A successful agreement in December is by no means a foregone conclusion. previous UNFCCC conferences have failed to achieve the goal of stabilizing greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, and the delegates at a similar conference in Copenhagen in 2009 were unable to reach meaningful consensus. Negotiations will resume in Paris when governments meet at the Climate Change Conference from the 30th of November to the 11th of December 2015. The draft text of the agreement enjoys full ownership by the governments of the world and represents a balanced text that will constitute the starting point for the final round of negotiations.